Are are we live? Yes, we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a classic Saturday stream. As many of you can already tell, what that means is today we are going to be talking Dungeons and Dragons. Not only that, but we're going to be going on and getting into the next huge part of our story time streams. But, before we go on into that recap, just want to give a quick hey, how are you all doing? How's your weekends going? Any plans coming up? What is going on with all of you? And a big thank you to everybody who is here instead of being at the Juniper stream. I know we overlapped a bit today, and I'm sad myself. I can't stick around and watch much, but hey, I like to keep my schedule. I'm that type of person. Except for last week, of course, and I'm infinitely sorry for how much things got out of schedule then. Fucking excited because a project I'm working on is going to have some really good shit happen. Hell yeah. How's it going? I'm doing good, Wood Bogus. Excited for this absolutely average weekend I got. Being able to do my usual streams. Had a lot of fun with my Mass Effect stream and ended up going a little overtime on that one. Though, as everybody knows, it is the end of the month. So that means I'm also bracing for tomorrow, the next day, having to drop off my rent. You know, ready for it, but it's always just kind of a pain to watch that shit go away. I have to scoop cat shit? Oh, sorry, Darness. I'm very sorry. Doing art, doing sport, using my vacation as much as I can. Hell yeah, Marcy, I'll get it. Lotus! It's been a while, I think, since you've been in at the beginning of one of my streams. How you doing? It's a mod to a game in an engine called Beyond, literally made in the 20th century. 32-bit engine, meaning the server can only have 4 gigabytes of RAM. It's midnight. I'm excited to watch your stream. Yeah, hello, Destroyer. I'm excited to see that people who are catching the Mass Effect stuff are also coming in to watch Dungeons and Dragons, even if it's not super great or something they're very familiar with. It's here. Had a great weekend. One of the best I've had in a long time, if you ignore the 7-hour power outage. Ouch! What'd you end up doing in that time? Go for one of those long existential walks where you slowly realize how much all of your hobbies rotate around electricity. Ugh. Not even 4 gigabytes due to the incompetent making. Yikes, Impy, I'm sorry to hear all that. Alright. Alright. I think we've got a lot of the introductions out of the way. So let's take a quick look at what we're talking about today. So. As always, I know there's a few people, or more than a few out there, who are not here for last stream. So, just as a bit of a start a stream breakdown, since I think there's at least half of you haven't been up to date on what's going on. Right now, we're going into my usual Saturday stream, where I talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Sometimes I do discussions of creating homebrew stuff, show off my own creations, talk about how you can build a world, build settings, build gods, character design ideas, bringing up some of chat's own creations. And sometimes we do a little thing I call story time, where I tell you tales from the current Dungeons and Dragons campaign that I am DMing. Tales in order, discussing what the party is doing and how it's been going. And we have been making a lot of progress lately, as after the end of my last homebrew breakdown series, I thought it'd be nice to spend a lot of time trying to slowly catch us up to the current state of my ongoing campaign. So. I believe it's a good enough thing for us to go ahead and start with a little bit of a recap. Is everybody feeling ready? Do you have your popcorn, snacks, and the like ready? Talking about creating characters. How do you like the beholder I drew? Do you mean the jazz beholder? That was a very beautiful boy, in my opinion. Or have you put out a new one recently? I'll go ahead and take a bit of a look as everybody gets their drinks, their soda, their popcorn, whatever else you might need for a nice, long story time. Let's see here. Yep, it's the Jazz Beholder, isn't it? I do love him. Wait, the Jazz Beholder? Alright. Martial, fine. I'll drop a bit of a link for you. Or would you guys prefer to just see that bit of artwork? Let's see what I can do to get this up and on screen quickly. Give me a second. So excited all of you are. All right, Marcial. Ooh, okay. That came in a bit large. Give me a minute to just kind of resize everything for you. All right. There we go. This is a little bit of an artwork by one of our continual viewers, Marcial. For anyone who's interested, I'll go ahead and give you the plug. Munger, I don't want to get out of bed because I'm so comfortable right now. Hell yeah. Oh no, I'm sorry, MP. But yeah, luckily it's just a still image, so it should be fine. So right here we have the Jazz Beholder for you guys. Just a little bit of a work by one of chat. but, I'm afraid that's all the preamble we have today. As we're gonna have to spend a little bit of time on recap for all those who haven't been here in a while. Now then, where to begin? During my last story time, the party had just returned from their last mission, locating a lost student from the College of Magic within the elven city of Corella. They went about through the nearby woods within the Ethereal Valley and did eventually find the girl. But by the time they had, she had been dead for weeks. It seems her experimentation had gone awry in one manner or another, and her and her bodyguards had somehow been captured by giant spiders. And in the scuffle, the poor student seems to have tragically or unluckily burned herself to death. The party would gather the bodies and eventually return to the city of Corella to return them to the guild hall and receive their payment. From there, they would all head off to first speak with the professor that had helped put up this initial job listing, explain to her that the student had died, and hand over all of the manuscripts the girl had had on her during her death, alongside the strange wand that the girl had kept locked away. From there, the party would venture off to one of her friends, the last one left within the college, and explain to her that her friend Hannah had indeed died. Returning to the girl, the luck stone they had found clutched in her hands. From there, Rasmussen would discuss a bit of a business proposition with the young student. It seems she had a panache for enchantment and the creation of magical items. And with the parting of a small fortune and the promise of a few weeks of time, the girl Cynthia promised Rasmussen that she would be able to fully record the enchantment he was after, and hopefully be able to apply it to any weapon that he would bring before her in the future. From there, the party would return to the guild hall, saddened a bit by the tales, excited by the new coin in their pocket. Before they would arrive, though, one of the members, Tortuga, the elf, would begin a discussion with some mercenaries that recognized the guards that had been brought in. It seems the two dead men that had accompanied the student were part of their own mercenary band and had taken up the job in privacy. They explained that they were all a group from the nearby kingdom of Tverfia, a land torn by warfare that they had abandoned. These men had been soldiers in the Tverfian army, but after years of slowly losing territory, of bleeding out numbers in every battle, the men deserted from the army and started their own war band down here, seeking jobs, adventuring positions, and whatever could pay their bills. But now, rumors spread throughout Tverfia of some single hero named the Judge of Pelor, who moves about throughout the land, slaying the enemies of Tverfia, killing knights, heavy cavalry, and gallants of the kingdom of Aethron. Hearing that the war is beginning to turn, these men hope to return to Tverfia, to find a way to slip back into their old positions, and to help the now winning war effort in their lost hope to reclaim all that had fallen to Aethron. However, their plight is not what caught Tortuga's ear. Instead, the name of a man, the Judge of Pelor, some warrior hero. When pressed, the mercenaries would explain that he in fact had a banner, a strange design. The top half, an azure blue sky. The bottom half, a dark green field with a single hill upon it, and atop that hill, a single church wreathed in flames. Hearing this description, Tortuga would pull out his enchanted flute and begin playing a sad dirge, a melancholic song that would cause the enchanted smokes the flute produced to show the long-forgotten hill with a village about it on fire, a smoking ruin. Tortuga would excuse himself just as the rest of the party arrived to hear the end of his tale. From this point, the rest of the party would create a deal with these mercenaries. In exchange for a bit of pay and any help they might need in Tverfia, they would guide and protect the mercenaries on their way back home. An interesting deal. Not a lot of coin on the table, but Ras is always a shrewd man and sees opportunity in a country torn apart by war that is beginning to turn in a new direction. And the whole party is a bit curious about what Tortuga knows of this man called the Judge of Pelor. The next morning, the party say their goodbyes within Corella. To the last group they had delivered here, including Aquila Andrana, a half-elf diplomat. She says goodbye as well, and wishes them all the best, telling them her family would always have work for them in the future. They would then say their final goodbyes to Milo under the bridge, a former member of their party that has chosen to depart for his own reasons. He would give to them his wagon and horse, Wish them the best on whatever journeys they have. And that morning, the party would depart from Gorilla. At the same time that a lone elven woman would enter it. Unbeknownst to this party, the woman, named Valandria, was a long-lost friend of Hannah, the girl who had died in the woods. And on her arrival to the city, she would begin questioning the guild hall about the group that had found the burnt girl. From there, she would visit Cynthia and ask even more questions, until eventually she would return to the professor and accuse that professor of using Hannah's death to further her own career by stealing her manuscripts and creations. With a significant amount of threats, Valandria would eventually leave the district and return to the guild hall. And as fate would have it, she would find a job that would guide her in the exact direction she was hoping to go. It seems a very wealthy and eccentric local, some woman named Aquila, wished for a present to be delivered to a recently departed party. One that matched the description of the group that Valandria already wished to track down. She accepted the job, took the strange package, and began hunting down those she had questions for about the death of her friend and why they had handed over her inventions to someone else. And there we are, caught back up from last stream, though there are many before it that some of you might have already missed. For those who are interested, though, and perhaps I should have started with this, all of my D&D streams are posted up in my own YouTube archive. I'll apologize for the small amounts of edits that exist and the fact that most of these are relatively raw VODs. But as Twitch doesn't hold on to my VODs indefinitely, and as the story develops over time and is very sequential, I wanted to make sure to have a full archive of it available for people to watch whenever they are so inclined. In this archive, you will also find all the videos of my Mass Effect series so far, and every D&D stream I've done, whether it was story time or not. Oh hey, we're in between stories, yeah. I've already subbed, hell yeah, darn ass. So, for those of you wishing to go back to the beginning, learn how the party came together, learn a bit about this lost character Milo, about who everyone is, and what brought them to Corella, feel free to explore my archive. Oh my god. Welcome back for all the gifted subs, Spring. Congratulations to Brainless, Darness, Jackie, Lotus, and Insane Seshiro. Thank you for the 5 gifted subs, Spring, and oh no, Destroya. I think you're probably one of the last people here who didn't get hit. Ah, and yourself. Yep. Welcome back for the 2nd month, Spring. Wow. Congrats. Well then, I think we're gonna have a few more instances of, some sound effects coming on through. So I'm gonna let those play out a bit before I get back into the story. But hopefully, everyone's feeling a bit caught up. Everyone's feeling a bit ready and excited to explore what they already have on hand. So. Hey, I went like multiple times with that. He must live with it. That's fair, Crazy. That's fair. If you're depending on luck, it might be a couple of streams. Or until the next time we see Hallfrost grace us with his presence and decide to show everyone who is the true raid boss of the streams. So, how's everyone feeling? Excited for the true delving? Interested in what comes next? Well then, I suppose, with our recap behind us, announcements out of the way, an exciting series of gifted subs, it is time for us to delve back in. It would be morning when the party would begin to depart. Some of the darker actions performed in the night seems to have pulled no attention, at least not yet. So Pharaoh and Malachite hold their breaths in the hope that the next couple of hours they'll be able to depart without an issue. Looking at the maps and following the course the mercenaries plan to take, the party sees it'll be a few days' travel moving through the kingdom of Athoria to arrive at the mountain pass that will take them northwards to Tverfia. With this route ahead of them, the mercenaries propose a deal that in town, all of them should purchase a few horses, and when crossing through the last town before the mountain pass, to sell them off. This will allow them to cut down their journey from 3 to 4 days down to at most 2 days through Aethan, making things a lot simpler. The party eventually agrees and spends a couple hours this morning purchasing a few nice horses, preparing their wagons, and gathering everything they will need. They head on to the road well before noon and begin this exciting travel with this strange group of 5 mercenaries from a distant kingdom none of them have been to in some time. The first day's travel passes without much incident. A few travelers here and there, an excitement of seeing all the different elves throughout this kingdom coming and going, and watching the capital of Corella disappear in the distance. Along the ways they travel, Tortuga finds himself staring off into the southeastern direction, seeing the vast jungles that lead back to a small country of Zisha, far away from here. The land that his monastery is in, the place where he was saved from a dark past. He wonders just how many days it would take to travel out home, to see that monastery again. But places the thought aside for now. His business takes him north to find the man called the Judge of Pelor. As night comes, the party and the mercenaries set about making camp nearby the road. The two groups keep mostly to themselves. While the party doesn't have anything against the mercenaries, they have grown to be somewhat independent and nervous around strangers at times. So they prepare their campfires and their tents and select a few of themselves to be on first watch. They are being hired after all, so the mercenaries will be allowed to have their full night's sleep. However, in the minute they have finished preparing their camp, thank you for the resubs sour cake. 4 months. Congratulations. One of the mercenaries crosses over to their camp with a large cauldron in hand. He places it down upon their fire and explains that they'll be covering the group's food needs for the most part. Inside they find a very hearty stew, something similar to a rice-based stroganoff. It does smell delicious as the party passes out their portions, and all of them head to bed. Those on first watch are Pharaoh and Tortuga. Most of their watch will pass quietly as night grows long and dark, until a strange noise is heard far into the distance. A strange, echoing noise. Something between an extended gasp and scream echoes through the woods. It is immediately bone-chilling and followed by strange noises that seems to echo through the trees of the distant woods. Bella's head cocks to the side. Her well-trained perception focuses. They are many miles off from the source of this sound. It seems to have simply caught the air well and echoed throughout the woods, as if this call was meant to be one to invoke terror in those who hear it. Feeling somewhat reassured, the pair of them finish their watch and inform the next group to be put up, to keep their attention towards the woods. They are likely safe, but there are noises out tonight that are dark and strange. The next morning would come about, and as everyone would pack and begin their journey, another morning of little consequence would pass, though the hair on the back of Tortuga and the feathers on the back of Farah's neck would grow to stand on end. The trail does take them in the direction of the noises they heard, and while the road does not cross directly into the woods, that is a very disturbing direction to be moving. It would come about midday as the party would begin crossing through a small village, one of the major stopping points that they could take along their way to the mountain pass. The party begins a slow procession through the center of town, where they find themselves stopped by a gathering of those who live here around a central house. They seem to be all looking down at something on the ground, and as the party on horseback draws closer, having to cross this way to get through the town, they see 3 corpses laid on the ground, eviscerated. There are pieces of rent metal there, destroyed weapons, and absolutely slaughtered corpses. Chests ripped open, limbs missing. A sight of absolute evisceration. The party finds itself slowing to a stop across from the corpses, listening to some of these villagers talking, before Malachite takes a moment to speak up. While Malachite is a very skilled combatant, her skills have never extended greatly into those of diplomacy. As she rides her horse up the group of villagers looking down at the 3 corpses, she looks around before loudly stating, "So what happened here?" The villagers all grow rather uncomfortable at this stranger asking them such a direct question. They get fucking eaten or something? Well, said one elven man, older than many of the rest. It seems to be also holding a level of control here. Perhaps a mayor or an elder. These men were some adventurers we had hired to solve a problem, but it seems to have gone a bit awry. Well, I'll say, see ya. With that, Malachite turns her horse and begins heading back to the party. As she does, Rasmussen feels his forehead furrow. The irritation of such an obvious job laid before them. He turns to Malachite and says, Did you want to learn a bit more? No, they just seem to have died. Aye, and they said they were adventurers they hired. So, there might be some coin to have here, huh? Oh, says Malachite, as she turns her horse and trots it back to the exact position she had just come from. Would you pay us to take care of it? Many of the villagers seem befuddled by what had just happened. The town mayor turns to this strange green girl atop her horse, stares past her at the group she rides with, seeing a group of about 10 people, some of which decked in heavy armor, some of them looking like classic mercenaries, scarred and battle-torn. While the one who has ridden up to speak seems a bit strange and out of place, on the whole, perhaps they could. The man begins to explain that over the past few weeks, there have been sounds coming from the woods just south of the village. That have been strange, terrible screams, noises of some sort of creature stalking the woods. The villagers themselves have seemed to have been under no real threat until a few days ago. A small boy from a forester family had been gathering mushrooms at night, it seems. He had found himself a bit too deep into the woods and grown lost, when suddenly he heard the noise growing closer. The boy was then attacked by some strange four-legged creature that clawed at him, though the boy was able to escape with his life, sprinting all through the night before eventually arriving back home in the village. With this attack, the elder had set about hiring a small group of adventurers to go in and kill whatever monstrous beast had been threatening the village. Since only one boy had been attacked, and he had been able to escape with his life, the elven elder figured a small group of about 3 should be enough to deal with whatever low-level threat lay within the woods. But it was just this morning when one of the hunters of the village discovered all 3 of them dead in the woods, slaughtered, eviscerated, armor rent apart, weapons shattered, their corpses heavily gnawed on. He was afraid that he would now have to raise a posse of villagers to try to find out what this threat was. But if the new arrivals were interested in handling this problem, he would be more than willing to give them the pay that had been promised for the 3 adventurers. 400 gold coins for the full eradication of whatever beast lay within the wood. The party would convene. They had been hoping to make a quick journey across Aethin and to arrive into Verfia as fast as possible, but perhaps they could spend a single day here, learn a bit more about what happened, and simply go into these woods and try to find whatever creature this was and put a quick kill to it. As the discussion grows on, Rasmussen would eventually convince the party to at least make the attempt at it, as he would look about and with his fingers make a very simple gesture. 400. A hefty amount of coin. While split between the 5 of them, it would not be a large amount. Many of the party members noted their somewhat empty pockets after purchasing their horses, and the idea of making a bit more coin is appealing. So the party would approach the mercenaries they had promised to travel with and explain that they would like to simply have the day in town to find out what happened and to earn themselves a little extra coin. The Taverfians agree, saying that 1 day delay isn't all that important, and they've already looked about and found that the town had a very decent inn where the Taverfians will be spending the rest of the afternoon drinking themselves and enjoying a real bath. With everything squared away, the party begins their attack on this new job presented to them by doing what has always been their go-to move for any curious mystery. They immediately split into 2 groups. Malachite and Tortuga begin talking with the mayor and find the hunter who had found the dead man and ask her to guide them into the woods to the spot of the slaughter so they might look around the field there and see what hints they could find of the creature they face. Meanwhile, Perch, Rasmussen, and Pharaoh cross town to the forester's house to have a conversation with the young elvish boy who had escaped the monster capable of slaughtering 3 adventurers in such a manner. Rasmussen, Pharaoh, and Perch arrive at the small hovel at the end of town, and knocking on the door are greeted by the boy's father. They ask if they might have a word with his son, explaining that they had been hired by the mayor as the next group to take care of these monsters, and that they would like to hear everything the boy has to say. Eventually, the father is convinced if this can kill whatever had harmed his son, he'll allow them to ask him a few questions, even if they might stir up some darker memories. The 3 are welcomed into the hovel and sat down at the table as the young boy crosses to them. He stands there shirtless, though, wrapped aggressively in a large amount of bandage that seems to go across his entire torso and back. The boy approaches them and sits down at the table as they begin asking him a few questions. Why was he out in the woods that night? The young boy explains that while going out and searching about for mushrooms and the like, he had come across a few large truffles, unreasonably large in fact, about the size of dinner plates, and have been gathering quite a few of them, following the trail. He had filled his bag before he had noticed that things had grown very dark, and that he had become quite lost within the woods. We begin then venturing about, trying to find his way home, until eventually he would begin to recognize some of the features that he would usually use to find his way home. But then he heard the sounds in the woods. Strange, guttural, high-pitched, gasping noises, growing closer and closer, before he heard the sound of something break into the run and see the pale thing charging at him. The boy turned and ran through the woods as fast as he could as the creature began to gain on it. Slowly, it came closer and closer until he felt a burning sensation lance across his back. But the boy did not slow and kept running, until eventually he seems to have lost the beings that had chased him. He ran for hours, he believes, until eventually he stumbled out of the woods and was able to find his way home. The 3 party members stared at the boy, wondering what it could be that this boy had survived, yet had killed 3 adventurers. The young boy of 10 had outrun them. He had been attacked, but had escaped. Yet, these were things capable of rending armor. Gently, Pharaoh asked the boy if she could see his injury. The boy nodded. Good night, Destroyer the Killer. I hope to see you later, and please do feel free to come back and watch the VOD anytime. The boy began to slowly unwrap his bandages. The party looked as he turned away from them and showed them his back. 4 long, straight lacerations went from the top of his shoulder all the way down his back to his lower hip. Something with massive claws, it seems to have slashed straight across his back, opening large wounds that by this time were at least beginning to heal. Pharaoh spent a bit of time looking at these wounds, and figured whatever had slashed at the boy had to have claws at least 6 inches long. However, they did not seem to do much more than slash across his back. The wounds were deep, sure, but not as deep as you would expect such claws to go. The creature definitely could have done more, yet failed to somehow. With that, the trio thanked the boy for telling them what had happened, and explained to him that they will go out and find these creatures, and that he will be safe. In gratitude, the boy tells them to wait one moment as he runs to a cupboard in the house and produces 3 massive truffles that he hands across to the party members, giving each of them one of these large brown mushrooms the size of dinner plates. The party thanks him and heads from the hovel towards the center of town, hoping to bring what they know to Malachite and Tortuga. While this is happening, Malachite and Tortuga are traveling into the woods with the village's huntress. She explains that lately there have been fewer and fewer creatures in the woods. Whatever this thing is either picking them off or has gotten them so scared that they are no longer traveling around this area as much as before. The two of them begin asking a few questions. They're very close to the enchanted woods of the Authorial Valley, and they ask her if they think anything from north of here might have crossed downwards. The elven huntress thinks for a moment and explains that the truth is, most of the things that live with the Authorial Valley never leave. There are a few exceptions, of course, but most everything from that wood wishes to maintain in contact with the Fae, and so would never travel this far south of it. That is, except for maybe the Protectors, but she couldn't think of any stories of them doing what had been done to the adventurers. Malachite and Tortuga begin asking her a bit more about these Protectors. The huntress explains she's never been one for much of the Fayish religion or spirituality that comes with the Authorial Valley. But she has always heard the stories of the 3 main groups of protectors that keep the valley safe, who might venture from it for one reason or another. The first is the Watchers in the Dark, nomadic groups of shifters born of Fayish magic that occasionally will set up encampments around the perimeter of the valley to chase away those who might bring her harm. In that moment, the party's minds go back to the strange shifters in the mountains they had encountered, how they had ambushed the party. They begin wondering what they were actually doing there. The next is one she knows very little about, except that to see it is apparently near synonymous with death. A group called the Cursed Orchard. As much as Malachite and Tortuga press, she states she knows nothing really about it except that it is a horrible group of protectors, that its name only begins to touch on what it is, and that though it is a protector, it does so within the perimeters of the wood and can never leave. Finally, she talks of a group called the Dancers, those who are elvish but have been granted unique gifts by the Feyan ways of combat. These, however, appear to be normal elves granted unique powers, not monsters or anything that might align with what is happening here. At the end of this discussion, the huntress announces that they are here and shows Malachite and Tortuga a small clearing in the woods, a slaughter ground. All about them are different pools of thick coagulating blood, drying under the sunlight. They see small bits and pieces of shattered bone, of rent metal, forgotten pieces of the broken weapons, all about. Searching in more detail, they even find small body parts, a foot, a few gnawed-on fingers, still here. Malachite then begins scouting the area, looking for any sign of where this creature might have gone, and is lucky to find a trail that tells them more than they were expecting. Malachite finds a series of footprints, or tracks to be accurate, leading away from here, soaked in blood and heading eastward into the trees. Looking about the tracks, there's something disturbing about them. Whatever creatures have them have massive claws on their front and back limbs, but more disturbingly, appear to have a large number. Looking about the tracks, Malachite sees there's probably at least 9 creatures, if not more, that did this. A pack of something, and not a singular monster. More disturbingly, however, is that these creatures seem to walk on hands and feet. Pointing out the details in the tracks, Tortuga is a bit shocked to see whatever these things are do walk on 4 legs, in a manner of speaking, but that their front limbs leave behind distinctive human-like handprints, marred by the long claws digging up the ground. Whatever these pale things are, they are not simply some beast of the wood. Looking about the trail, Tortuga and Malachite begin wondering if they should scout a bit without the party. Looking down at the blood-soaked battlefield where 3 adventurers died, however, they think better of this. And first, decide to head back to the village so that they might convene and share what they had learned. Returning to the town center, the party fully convenes and begins sharing what information they now have. First, Tortuga and Malachite explain that what they are hunting is actually a small pack of creatures. At least 9, if not more of them, stalk the woods. They're not particularly massive, but they have extremely long claws and seem to be somewhat humanoid in shape. The rest of the party shares what they had learned from the boy, that they had lived somewhere deep within the woods and seemed to attack him at night. That somehow the boy had escaped. That he had been attacked, that they had even caught him and clawed across his back. But this young 10-year-old boy had still escaped these creatures, whatever they were. Thinking, the party takes a moment to gather their information. Nothing comes to mind. As much as they try to repiece the puzzle, they fear that they'll simply have to walk into the woods and follow this trail to find out what it is they truly face. And so the party prepares their gear, their weapons, everything they'll need, and wait a few hours for the night to begin to grow. The sun is still up when the party begins heading out. These creatures are nocturnal. Then it'd probably be best to begin their search before the sun is truly gone. But they might have to wait until dark for whatever these things are to emerge. They gather together and head deep into the woods, following Malachite and Tortuga as they guide them first to the slaughter field, and then begin making their way down the trail that the creatures had left behind. It is some 20 minutes of walking before Tortuga at the front signals for everyone to be quiet, to crouch down, and to wait. Tortuga peers through the woods and sees something standing. Where the light of the sun peers through the woods and shows some strange, brown, furry thing standing perfectly still, staring straight ahead. Tortuga begins creeping forward alone, allowing the shadows to embrace him, to hide his approach. Coming closer, Tortuga is eventually able to make out the details of the deer standing perfectly still in this clearing, staring straight ahead. Relieved to see only a deer, Tortuga continues creeping forward, wishing to not startle this creature, watching it as he goes. As he gets closer and closer, though, Tortuga finds himself moving slower and slower. The beast has not moved a single muscle. It has stared straight ahead, unmoving, unblinking. Its muscles not moving a twitch. Its rib cage still. Eventually, Tortuga finds himself within 20 feet of the deer as he begins slowly circling. He sees the pool of blood about its feet, organs dangling down from its stomach. And more horrifyingly, as Tortuga comes to the other side of it, he sees its entire left half torn open, half of its ribs missing, its entire innards splayed out and dripping onto the ground, two of its legs shattered, and yet it stands stock still, staring forward. Tortuga signals for the rest of the party to move to the clearing, and as they all move up, they find themselves struck dumb for a moment at this strange, horrific sight. Half of a deer standing, perhaps some omen or warning of what lays beyond. They see the pool of blood and organs on the ground, this thing torn open, and yet it seems stiff with rigor mortis and still standing impossibly. The party spends some time exploring this creature, trying to find any hint of what has happened here. Looking about, they find that there are maggots sitting in its organs, so perhaps it has been here a little while. As Malachite stares, she reaches into the mess of viscera and picks up one of the white grubs and stares at it. The maggots aren't moving, she says. What? The maggots, they're stiff, she says, as she holds it between two fingers, like trying to bend it, and shows that the creature doesn't move at all. What could have done this? What indeed? Spending some time, Malachite eventually picks up the trail from here and shows that it continues eastward, a bit deeper into the woods. The party sets themselves and begins following her lead. Moving through the trees, suddenly, something begins to pierce the skyline. Strange rock formation in the distance, some 20 feet high. The party slows itself as it goes closer and closer, and then the clearing begins to reveal itself. They find a large area of the wood is cleared around this massive rock formation, some strange outcropping of stone that pierces into the sky. They stare at this strange thing before their attention eventually drifts to a broken down wagon nearby, to the bloodstains on the ground. The party begins slowly stepping into the clearing, all of their weapons drawn, nerves tight and on edge. Was this another site where these creatures had attacked? Perhaps some travelers moving through this area had decided to camp out here at this strange stone monument. A minute passes as the party stands, staring, waiting. And then they hear a scratching sound coming from the stone monument ahead of them. Watching, they see as small carved holes in the stone begin shifting and moving like grubs crawling out. They see as one after another of these strange, pale, hunched humanoid creatures begin clawing their ways out of their makeshift cells in this strange stone. One by one, they drop onto the ground as the sun is slowly setting. Party watches as their heads shake from side to side, seemingly adjusting to the light, before one of their dark black eyes narrows on the party. These strange creatures begin looking as one of them stares. Its mouth opens, revealing rows of elongated, rotting teeth. Claws from its hands as it rises onto its back legs and points with a pale, crooked finger. And they hear that gasping scream come from its mouth. Looking at them, suddenly, in sight, Malachite's mind goes back to when she was being trained as a ranger, taught to hunt the undead things that could stalk the night, to a creature that her teacher referred to as the harbingers of vampires. Her teacher had told her that these creatures were often used as guard dogs or as initial invaders into a land, but that they did not originate from the vampires. They were simply a favored tool of theirs. These creatures had another origin story to them. It is believed that whenever a humanoid reduces itself in desperation to the act of cannibalism, that sometimes it can cause a dark, magical curse to set hold, to leave them starving, cursed, horrific, and monstrous. These creatures are known by a few names: harbingers of death, the cursed ones, but most simply know them as ghouls. As the scream pierces through the space, the ghouls charge at the party, their hunger insatiable and flesh in sight. And as the fight begins, we will take a momentary intermission just to check in with you all. How is everybody doing? Thank you for the redeem, Darness. This is the hat you were talking about, right? The Space Cowboy? I sure hope I picked correctly. Didn't want to stop the story, but I made sure to do a swap in the middle of it. And yeah, Marciel fucking calling it. What gave it away? Was it the physical description? Hearing of how they are made? Or are they simply a common enough enemy that once undead are brought up, your options are either zombies or ghouls, and it's a pretty easy choice at that point. By the way, how much are those truffles worth? Oh, if you were to sell them, honestly, each truffle alone costs as a whole day's worth of rations. So I think I would start by marking them like a day's worth of fine rations, which I think is about 5 copper pieces. But given their uniqueness, I say each of them would probably be worth about a silver piece if you sell it smartly. Yes. So how's everybody doing? How are you all enjoying today's story time? And what do you think happened? The amount of corpses and the footsteps. First I thought the boy might be an albino werewolf. Okay. Yeah, I will admit, when the party saw that the boy had survived and had been clawed, all of them believed that I was about to make them fight some werewolves, and that the boy had been infected with a werewolf claw and would be turning the next full moon. After all, these attacks only seem to happen at night and the like. I think the reason the boy ain't dead is because of those truffles. Well, if you guys would actually like to know a bit of Dungeons and Dragons lore about ghouls, ghouls have a magical property about them. Whenever they claw something, it has to make a constitution save. And if it fails, it becomes paralyzed. That is how ghouls like to feed. They will basically dogpile a creature, clawing at it until it becomes entirely unable to move. And then they will feed on the paralyzed person. However, long ago, the god Corella of the elves gave his children a blessing, making all elves entirely immune to the ghoul's paralytic effects. So, a young elvish boy clawed by a ghoul would be able to keep running without issue. However, 3 adventurers, none of them elvish, with a bit of bad luck and an ambush being placed, could very easily be overwhelmed by a very small number of ghouls, paralyzing them and then consuming them. It is something you would need to know, I think, a lot of D&D lore to fully piece together, but it is also fully there as one of my favorite ways to paint a mystery. So. I ain't been listening. I missed so much at the start, so I'm lurking, gaining points, and plan to watch the VOD later. Gotcha, crazy, no problem. So that explains how the villagers can pass the con save. Yeah, exactly. So the boy was actually entirely immune to their paralytic effects and was able to keep running. And yeah, that's how a 10-year-old can escape a ghoul while an adventurer would be in even more trouble. Because, interestingly, this is one of the few creatures that's powers is actually affected by its target's race. I don't know how many of those actually exist in D&D, but ghouls are one of the most popular examples of a thing that some people are immune to. Now. I suppose I can't leave a combat cliffhanger for much longer. So. We will go ahead and get right back into it. Can a vampire tell those ghouls to sod off? Yet, within my world, vampires hold a strong influence over other undead, ghouls included, and tend to basically use them almost like packs of dogs, essentially. Their resistance to normal damage, their ability to paralyze enemies, and their undead nature make them very useful savage beasts that vampires tend to command. But for now, the party does not have the benefits of a vampire on hand. Only one of them is an elf, and they've only just now realized what is facing them. As the ghouls charge towards their next meal, the party quickly forms up into ranks, essentially. Rasmussen calls out to get Pharaoh to set up behind him, to have Perch and Malachite close in on other side, creating a hefty, tanky wall that the ghouls would have to punch through. And Tortuga, with his unnatural speed, is allowed to circle around. The fighting begins as the ghouls descend upon the front line, clawing at the party viciously. However, as much as their claws pierce into Rasmussen, Perch, and Malachite, their robust natures and some of their natural resistances grant them hefty advantages at resisting the ghouls' paralytic effects as they begin hacking and slashing at the beasts. As soon as the creatures, though, begin their assault, Tortuga is the first to move, dashing around behind them. Tortuga quickly moves into the pack, striking once, twice, 3 times with aggression into the first ghoul he sees, before quickly darting far away. The first time he does this, the ghoul he strikes breaks from the pack and begins chasing after Tortuga. But with his great speed, his absolute control of his movements, the ghoul is unable to catch him as Tortuga begins leading it on a chase that he knows he will eventually win. But as Tortuga deals with this one, he finds his eyes darting up occasionally as something dark happens at the party's defensive line. Perch begins lashing all about him with the massive hammer. But as he strikes, the shadow of the weapon seems to bleed. Darkness pours off of it with every hit and seems to wrap around the ghouls that he strikes. As these shadows descend, they seem to be gripping and pulling at the ghouls. Malachite is overrun as 3 of the ghouls begin darting towards her at once. But as one of them has been struck by this strange magic, the whole party watches as it dives and seems to be caught mid-air, the shadows pulling at its wrists, preventing it from reaching Malachite. The shadows all about Perch begin to roil and writhe as he descends into his battle fury. Something is dark in the powers that Perch possesses. Perhaps it radiates from the armor he uses, but as dark smoke begins to pour from his helmet, it seems the origin is something else. Perch has always been hesitant in combat to show off the full force of his powers, but here he does not hold back against the undead as he reaches into the shadowy core of his magic. He lashes out with the shadowy powers he possesses and begins binding, holding the monsters, preventing them from effectively attacking his allies. While lashing out with his hammer, he strikes again and again. But while their front line is extremely dense, as the shadow magic Perch is able to bring to bear binds the creatures from being fully effective, their undead vigor means that they are extremely hard to kill, and their numbers are beginning to press. Tortuga can only deal with one at a time, and only by committing himself to a hit-and-run tactic. Soon they will be overrun by the onslaught. For Pharaoh holds aloft her holy symbol. Strange carving of a skull made of a red-veined marble. Her eyes close as she offers up a prayer to the God on high. A warm breeze begins to circle the field, unnoticed by those directly engaged in this vicious combat. At first, only Pharaoh and Tortuga see the small white petals picked up by the wind and blown in a vortex around the party. Picking up speed, the petals move faster and faster before they begin to create a fog-like blur. A whipping tornado of white petals encircle the party. And once they are at speed, the encircling ends as the petals begin carving through the pack of ghouls. The gift from her god, this spiritual guardian of a storm of petals, begins eviscerating ghouls one at a time as they push themselves into the storm to get close to the food before them. As the petals rend through each ghoul, their color changes as they grow soaked in blood. The white petals soon all turn red, and Tortuga stops to stare at this vortex of red petals encircling Pharaoh and slaughtering the ghouls within its reach. While the undead have a vigor that protects them somewhat from non-enchanted metal, making them hard to kill with normal weapons. A radiant blur of enchanted flowers is more than they can handle. It is less than 30 seconds from the moment that storm starts before the last of the ghouls is put down. The storm calms. The petals fall, and the party stands on a field of red flower petals and dead ghouls. Victorious, the party celebrates for a moment before they begin their exploration of this strange stone. They can't allow even one ghoul to remain alive somewhere, and so they will be looking about this area, trying to find out what happened here, where these ghouls came from, and why they are here. The worst case scenario is to find out these ghouls are a harbinger of some sort of vampiric force. And while that's not guaranteed, the party is on edge as they begin exploring the site. First, they go to the wagon, and searching through it, they find some abandoned crates that seem to have held grain at some time, though it seems absolutely picked clean. As they move the wagon about, there's a cracking and snapping sound as the wheels give out beneath it. They seem to be somewhat rotted through. This wagon must have been here for at least 2 months unattended before this had happened. Looking through, they don't find much sign of anything. And so the party begins making its way to the large stone that the ghouls had emerged from. Looking about it, this 20-foot-high obelisk, they find that it holds no natural caves or nooks or crannies that the ghouls had been hiding in. Instead, they find deep holes in the stone that the ghouls seem to have burrowed with their impossibly long claws, like maggots sinking into a corpse. Approaching one of these holes, Rasmussen begins reaching towards the bottom, where he sees a thick, coagulated layer of mess and blood. As his fingers touch it, you realize within the mess there is canvas. And so he sets about pulling up this strange coagulated thing from the bottom of the ghoul's nest. As he rips it out from the singular tunnel that one of the ghouls had lived in, he places it upon the ground and sees a blood-soaked and viscera-filled tent, long since beginning to rot from the mess that had been soaked into it. It seems these ghouls had gathered tent material. Reaching into other holes, they find refuse, clothing, blankets, and the like that had been packed into the bottom of each of these strange little holes that the ghouls had dug in. Once packed in to make a soft, squishy bottom, the creature seemed to sleep in these things, allowing the blood and viscera to drip off them, to soak into the material, and to bind it into the bottom of the stone. But why would ghouls create nests? Where do they get all these ruined tents and cloths, blankets, and everything else that they had packed in here? From the looks of it, if these creatures had been here for over 2 months, how is this the first anyone has heard of them? What happened here? Tortuga begins going back over the wagon before he eventually finds something he recognizes. He finds a small bit of cloth with the symbol of Zisha on it. It seems this wagon had come from Zisha. Probably all these people were from it as well, but then it begins to dawn on Tortuga. With the ongoing war with the vampires to the far east, as land is captured, as the vampires' blood slaves are freed in raids, and as many people lose their homes to warfare, there has been a massive influx of refugees, of those without home, of those who have been exiled from one land or another, of slaves who know not where to go anymore. While most kingdoms refuse to take in any large number of those without any means to survive, the one small country of Zisha has opened itself to all. The country is led by a strange system of interlinked monasteries, men of deep ethical beliefs based on philosophical systems. They would not allow any refugee to go hungry, and so told all kingdoms that any refugees made from the Ascrostian War were free to come to Zisha. And such a flood of thousands would come. And while it is difficult to manage this influx, the Zishans have worked hard to provide what they can to all those who come. Tents, small amounts of grain, and whatever can be spared is given to all those who seek refuge there. And it seems this wagon held refugees from Zisha. They seem to have been heading westward, trying to get farther from the war, probably trying to find somewhere they could settle down that wasn't as overrun as Zisha now is. But perhaps they had grown lost in the wood. What little food they'd had most likely had run out. And so that is where the desperation must have began. Lost in the woods, these poor refugees resulted to the only thing they had left, and braced for the dark curse that would follow. The party takes what evidence they can, gathers up proof of how many of the ghouls they slayed, and confirm that they had killed all the ghouls in this area, before they begin making a slow, somber way back to the village. Crossing through the woods, they come across the place where the paralyzed dead deer had been stood, and see it is now collapsed onto the ground. Whatever curse their claws had inflicted had been released with their death. And the party looks on at the sight of this rotting deer and the now writhing maggots gorging themselves on its long since spilt innards. The party eventually find their way back to the village and begin approaching the elder. Rasmussen looks about at the party before they arrive at him and starts to conduct a bit of a plan. He says, "Well, we were only supposed to kill one monster in the woods, and I think we've proven ourselves to be more than capable of that." Holding up the bag of over 15 ghoul thumbs, Rasmussen states, "Since we went a bit above and beyond, found out what happened there, and killed out a whole pack of these monsters, I think we might be able to push for a little bit more." As he says that, Malachite turns towards Rasmussen and holds up her fingers in a symbol of 400, the amount of pay they had been promised for the slaying of monsters. In response, Rasmussen shakes his head and holds up his own fingers. 500. As horrific of a sight the party had just seen, they can't help but smile at the thought of getting just a little extra coin in pocket. And so they approach the elder and explain what had happened. That there had actually been a pack of monsters out there, ghouls, and that they had killed them all. Rasmussen begins saying, "Though there was a few more than we had expected, and it was a bit of a dangerous fight for us to get into." The town mayor states, "Yes, we're so thankful for what you were able to do for us, and though we don't have much, we were able to scrounge together the full payment of 400 coins that we had promised you." Hearing this, Rasmussen goes stiff for a moment as he turns to the party and says, "Did you all hear that? They were able to scrounge the coin for us. Isn't that nice?" The party watches as a lot of the excitement begins to leave Rasmussen's face as he holds up to the party 400. With that, the party accepts their pay with the gratitude of the mayor and head off to join the mercenaries for a night of drinking. Here, Rasmussen shares the story of what had happened with their traveling companions and asks the men a bit about themselves, about the War of Tverfia, everything they've heard about the Judge of Pelor. They begin telling the rumors they've heard, that the Judge is a highly skilled combatant, that he slays even the most skilled of knights easily, and that he is believed to be a holy crusader for the god Pelor, there to slay all who have betrayed their beliefs. As the drinking grows heavy and the stories grow more fantastical, Tortuga finds a time to slip from the group and to head out into the dark of night. He begins moving through the town before eventually heading out into the woods. He makes his way slowly through the trees, drawing out the black wood bowstaff. He approaches a tree as he takes the staff in both hands and swings it with his whole might, striking the side of the tree, digging a divot into the bark and the soft wood beneath. Tortuga roams about the woods for 10 minutes, striking each tree he comes across as hard as possible, before eventually coming to a stump. There he leans his bow staff against it and sits down on the staff, his hands coming up and covering his eyes as he allows the quiet of night to and wrap. Tortuga's mind is reeling. He can't think straight. He sees a village choked in smoke, a hill, a church, men laughing, and a severed head looking up at him. Thinking of the ghouls, Tortuga sees whips, vampires. His past. Tortuga feels something at the pit of his stomach growing. A sickening feeling that begins rising. From his core, it begins pushing up into his chest, into his throat. He feels a bloody rage, a sickening depression, something begin gripping higher and higher. And then he feels a soft rap against the top of his skull. A similar feeling to one of the senseis of his monastery rapping him over the back of the head when he fails to recite one of the rules of the school or performs an action believed to be beneath a monk of the Way of Shadows. Looking over, Tortuga sees his quarterstaff had slid along the stump and fallen, cracking him in the head lightly. Tortuga reaches over and grabs a hold of the quarterstaff. And as he does, he feels a presence nearby. Turning his attention, Tortuga sees the strange, bald, elven figure, dressed as a master of his monastery sat before him. The man he has now seen twice in his dreams, and twice when he has meditated. He looks at his quarterstaff and looks at the strange man before him. Well, I think I've figured it out, at least in part. The bald man looks up at him and slowly states, "And what is that?" "I think I only see you when I'm holding my quarterstaff. You're also dressed like one of the masters from the school. And everything you say is always so cryptic, like my old sensei. I think you're one of them. I think you're one of the teachers from the monastery, but like, in my quarterstaff." Slowly, the man's head begins to nod. Well then, that's interesting. It is an interesting thing. So, what is it you want? There's nothing in particular I want, Tortuga. What is it you want? With that, Tortuga furrows his brow a bit. It feels like he's back at the monastery again. One of the masters trying to give him a lesson. How about this, then? You have been lost in thought for some time. Tortuga watches as the man's eyes move to the side and stares at one of the trees that he had slammed his quarterstaff against. Sorry about that. You seem to be struggling greatly, with much rage, Tortuga. Why is that? I think he did it, Tortuga says. I think he's one of the ones that did it. That attacked my home. And what does that make you want to do? I want to find him so you can hurt him. No, Tortuga finds himself caught up. Vengeance, slaughter. This dark, sickening feeling growing in him. He knows it goes against nearly everything the monastery that saved him believes in. Everything this figure in front of him likely believes. I know I shouldn't, but I want to kill him. With that, the figure in front of Tortuga stands slowly and looks him up and down. Tortuga. Those who find their way to the hidden monastery are almost always filled with a dark, deep part of themselves. No one finds themselves that deep in shadow for good reasons. All of us possess a vicious, dark hunger that will drive us to do horrific things. What we are taught at the monastery is not something that can prevent those thoughts, those desires, your past from coming to you. The way of shadows is meant to show you how to hide yourself from danger, and when necessary, to hide others from you. The way of law is meant to teach, to create a fundamental lesson that can guide you to resist what drives you. And the way of action is meant to explain the consequences of what you might do and why sometimes you should act quickly to prevent horror from occurring. Tortuga begins looking up at the man and finds himself growing cold as the man's dark eyes stare back at him. The lessons you need to learn are not how to never feel a darkness, a hunger. With each word, Tortuga watches as the snarl begins to grow across the strange figure's face. His lips curl upwards. We all have darkness, Tortuga, but we must learn to resist. With that, Tortuga eyes go wide as he watches the figure raise his hackles and reveal the large fangs. The strange vampiric figure stands before him, dressed as a master from his monastery. I know better than most how vicious hunger can be. Memories, enslavement, the vampires, the monastery, smoke, screaming fire. All of it begins flashing before Tortuga's mind. I was once in a dark place, Tortuga, as you were. But there are ways out. Suddenly, Tortuga hears in the distance a drunken voice calling out, Tortuga! Where are you? We didn't see you at the bar. We're tracking you, don't worry. Other voices pierce through the night as well. It sounds like the entire party has come searching for Tortuga after he had left the bar, though they are all, from the sounds of it, blindingly drunk. He begins turning his attention back to the strange man, who seems to only appear when he holds the quarterstaff. They seem to care about you somewhat, no? Yeah, they do, Tortuga states. Well then, perhaps you should go let them know that you are safe. With that, the figure is gone. Tortuga takes up his quarterstaff, gives a deep sigh as he yells out, all right, I'm coming. Y'all really go all the way out here while drunk? Course we did. I couldn't leave you. What have them ghouls that gotten ya? For that, the party gathers up and returns to the bar. Spend a night sleeping, preparing for the next day's journey and the entrance into the mountain. So ends today's telling of the story of the party, but not the last story of the evening. Instead, I have one short, dark tale to tell about Zisha, about a small elven village near the border, and about refugees forced into darkness. Some months ago, a group of refugees gathered into a wagon. They had been in Zisha for a long time, but as more and more people began to pour into the land, they knew they would need to find somewhere else to settle. And they believed that they could head to the land of the elves, the kingdom of Aethan. It was large, it was prosperous, and they were all farmers, as it were, so they were certain they would be able to find a new home there, to create a new future for themselves. The small family of a dozen or so gathered up what meager supplies they could, what foodstuffs they were allowed to take, loaded a wagon, and headed northwestward towards the kingdom of Aethan. It would be weeks traveling through the woods as no road lied between the two lands, and they would catch themselves growing lost more than once, their supplies dwindling quickly. Until, in the distance, they saw a large stone obelisk, a strange natural figure that reminded them of all the unique stone-like structures from Zisha. As such, they redirected their path through the woods in the direction towards this. This thing could be seen pretty far, and could act as a determinant for them, a monument, a way to mark where they were, and how to get back to their next campsite. Slowly they would unpack what few supplies they had left. Only about 2 days' worth of food remained. They would need to find out where they were, find some food, anything at all, so that they could survive. Luckily, these woods do seem to have an amount of food in them. While none of them are experienced foresters, even a few peasants should be able to figure something out. And so they begin fanning out through the woods. And as Providence would have it, one of them would find out they were no more than an hour away from an elven village within the kingdom of Aethen. They had made it. Returning home that evening, all of them would quickly pack everything they had into the wagon and begin marching it through the woods until eventually they arrived at the village's outskirts. Here they would be met by the village elder and a few other villagers armed. The two leaders would meet and begin talking. First, the refugees would explain they are looking for somewhere they can settle, somewhere they could create a farm and the like. But the elven elder cuts them off. I'm afraid Aethen is closed to Zishan refugees, he says. We cannot take any people into our lands right now, and I am fully within my rights to refuse you access to our village. But we are low on food. If there's anything, I'm afraid there's nothing. Please, head back in the way you came. Return to Zisha. We won't be helping you here, says the elven elder. There is growing anger here. Eventually, the refugees begin shouting, but the elves turn them away, weapons drawn, spears and arrows pointed. They send the refugees back into the woods. Before night is over, they find themselves back, just an hour away, at the stone obelisk. The supplies are gone now. No food to be had. So close to a village, yet turned away. The next morning, they send out people to maybe scrounge up some berries, mushrooms, anything from the surrounding woods. Yet it seems animals, natural food is all closer to the village. And every time they start venturing close, they are driven away again. They are able to get some small amount of food, but with each time they are caught, the response from the elvish villagers grows more and more hostile, until eventually one of them is sent scurrying with an arrow in their thigh. The refugees are slowly starving. Their camp at the base of the stone obelisk, growing more and more desperate, scrawny, and delirious. Some of them begin eating the bark from the trees nearby, others chewing on grass. One man seems to have been so delirious from lack of regular food. They watch as he begins slowly shredding his own blankets into neat sheets, long and thin. To no apparent end, he continues to shred it apart, his fingers bleeding from the effort. The man who had been shot by an arrow quickly grows feverish. Starvation, injury, infection. He would not last long, and he did not. The morning would come when the refugees would find the one who had led them, the head of their family, dead. They all gather around and begin to prepare their burial. With no tools, they dig with their bare hands, using up what little energy they have left. They dig a grave and drag the man's corpse to it. But as it sits on the lip of the dirt hole, they all stare, bleeding from their fingers, stained with dirt, ribs showing. They stare. And they snap. With that, they descend into that final madness that takes them to their inevitable fate. Their homes were lost in the war with the vampires. They should have remained in Zisha, but even there they were starving. And they had hoped that this new land would welcome them. Instead, they were driven away, driven to starve, merely an hour from salvation. That desperate hunger, that rage, would consume them, forge them into the ghouls that haunted the woods. Their only monument would become their new home, as their ghoulish vigor drove them to claw at the stone, each of them making their own cell, gathering up the tent material that they had slept in. Some long-locked part of their brains know this would make a good resting site, as they gather their blankets and tents and pack them into their holes. They sleep here, knowing that this is where they're supposed to be, and wait for the day that a group of adventurers would wander to their home. Their next meal. Their vengeance. And as their last breaths escape their undead mouths, as the petals tear through them, as their skulls are crushed by the hammer, salvation is visited on their cursed existence, as what happened to them is lost to history. And with that, we end today's dark, horrific tale of the party slaying ghouls in the wood that plagued an elvish village, as they made a bit of coin and would head onwards on their journey, leaving behind a dark secret. And with that, we can end things, and I can get back into chat. I hope you all do appreciate that I try not to interrupt the flow of things, to just kind of get through them, but I hope to catch up on what everybody has been talking about. What do you guys think of today's story time? What of the dreaded hunger that took the poor folk that were driven into desperation? What do you think of the strange figure that speaks with Tortuga? And what comes next on the road to Tefurfia? Let's see here. Couldn't the party acquire more provisions or otherwise as a bonus for slaying the ghouls? They definitely could have. There probably would have been some sort of persuasion check, and to be honest, the party tends to be a bit hesitant with persuasion checks. They are very crazy well built for combat, but I think a majority of the party actually dumped charisma for one reason or another. And there tends to be a bit of a struggle when it comes to negotiating and the like, to the point that the party was more than happy to accept 400 gold and didn't seem too interested in pushing things. Not to break the immersion, but does the player Tortuga also scream and rage as roleplay? He doesn't tend to really scream or rage a lot of the time. There have been a couple of instances where he has gone very, like, smoldering anger, but that tends to be where Tortuga lives more so, in a very quiet anger, something that builds, just sort of that growl in the back of someone's throat when they're saying something like, "You're saying you want us to leave these people behind." That very intense emotion that doesn't outburst as much. Can Perch get drunk? He very well can, and Milkblade has made attempts to get him more and more drunk. There are drinks that can make it harder or easier, but unfortunately, as Shades are a constitution-based class, they tend to be rather resistant to most poisoning stuff, which is the baseline for how I do drunkenness. If anyone's interested, I do have posted up videos where I break down how I do my own drunkenness rules. But if people actually want to see them on screen, go ahead and ask in chat, and I'll work to actually get up some of my home rules that you guys can look over and see how I go about that type of stuff. Yo, that was bloody amazing. Thank you, Marcial. That was dark. Yeah, Spring. I wanted to make a mystery that wasn't obvious, that was really dark, and work to kind of hint at a bit of what goes on in the world, of this idea of how refugees are kind of treated in sort of this medieval society. What is wrong with the Elven Kingdom? I want everywhere to feel very realistic, and up to this point, the Elven Kingdom has felt very kind of pompous to my players, but I wanted an underlying, like, the real issue with kind of that pompous, isolationist approach that the High Elves take, is that there is a darker underbelly to it. You know, this story is sad, but they could have hunted. That's what I never liked about the story. It'd be difficult at first, but anyone can get the hang of hunting. But I also know how people are, and how most people would never try enough to succeed. That is true, Darness. But additional effect was the Elven village was actively working to keep the refugees from hunting or foraging within the area that belonged to the village. So there were times when they were getting shot at by arrows, or elves were yelling at them or driving them off their land. So they would have had to move kind of into the directions that they were very unfamiliar with. They would have had to re-scout new areas of the woods and tried to hunt without bows, arrows, or any actual tools on hand. All they were able to leave Zisha with were a few tents and a couple of bags of grain. So they were very much in a position where they would have had to been hunting with sharpened sticks, maybe knives. And since they were already half starved to begin with, they were very unlikely to be able to make much of a real play at things beyond trying to track down bugs, slugs, and things they could catch with their bare hands. I'm just gonna nod and act like I was listening. Go ahead, Crazy. But I hope you do get a good chance to watch the VOD. I'm pretty sure that the starving, unarmed refugees weren't going to be able to feed themselves by hunting. I would like to see those rules. All right, Darness, I'll work on getting them up as soon as I'm caught up. They already have a VOD to watch, Erica. See those rules. Since the party is real diverse, do they face curiosity or racism often? I figure that Aarakocras aren't a common sight on land. No, so you know what? I'll see if I can get something up and running to kind of show off some bits and pieces of my lore real quick. Since we got a bit of time, and I cut my story a little short today. 1 second, 1 second. So we'll do that, and also try to get the house rules up to show off. So let's see. Window capture. I don't want to show that. I want to show. There we go. All right, I'll shrink up the fire a bit. And I'll take these kind of in a detail style order. Uptime. I'm afraid I don't have that command, darn ass. But if you want to know, I've been up for 2 hours and 10 minutes. So I think those first 10 minutes are, just kind of my waiting. So Martial, for how Eric Cocker specifically work, they do, Pharaoh does get quite a bit of curiosity some of the time, but honestly, it's more so from the way she's dressed. She is dressed very much very similar to like a cleric or a paladin would be, and so she has this bright white look about her, heavy armor, and this holy presence that makes people wonder if she's like a holy knight or something. Eric Cocker are unique, rare to see, but it's not something like, oh, are you an Aarakocra type of thing? It's like, well, obviously she's an Aarakocra, and like she looks like a knight. I wonder who this person is, what their life is like. It's more of like an awe figure than like, just to kind of paint where that curiosity comes from. Ah, thank you, Xenaku. Yeah. But Pharaoh does have a bit of a thing on her side. So all Aarakocra come from a kingdom called Ananora within the Benor Mountains. And they don't really venture away from the Benor Mountains very often. But almost any time they do, they are accompanied by dwarves that are part of their kingdom. There's the Benor dwarves that live under the mountain, and the Ananora dwarves that live on top of the mountain. And they're kind of famous. The Benor trade in the Moldir metal, which is famous throughout the world as being the most expensive enchanted metal that does exist. And the Ananora are famous for being involved with the ancient Empire of Light. And Pharaoh happens to be traveling around with Rasmussen, who is a Benor dwarf. Because of this, when people see them together, there is a bit of a, oh, is that an Aarakocra? Oh yeah, look, she's with a Benor dwarf. That must be an Aarakocra and a Benor off on some sort of trading or other mission for the Ananora kingdom. Because of that, a lot of people come to kind of an assumption that fits the way the Aarakocra have presented themselves. There's definitely a level of curiosity, but it's more of an awe curiosity than really like the racism face type of curiosity. Let's see. I love Pharaoh because she is one of the reasons Junie is called a furry. That's pretty great. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and Perch is able to kind of defend himself a little bit because the metal he wears, his suit of armor, is made entirely of Moldir. So you now have an Aarakocra, a Benar dwarf, and a man dressed in Moldir metal. So it really just feels like the adventuring party comes from the Benor Mountains, as opposed to them being an eclectic group that has come together one at a time, which kind of lends them a bit of credence and a lot of assumptions about their origins. Let's see here. Okay, I thought of like the Astartes 40k, even though they exist in the Imperium, only the teams and percentiles of citizens will ever see one. Yeah, so there's definitely that level of like, whoa. But you don't like bring it up to them, You just sort of sit in awe, stare. And there are often times where Pharaoh or Perch or some other party members do notice when they're at a bar, like peasants or commoners staring at them and whispering between each other, but they don't tend to get approached about it. Let's see here. Here we go. So for those who are curious, here is my drunkenness rules. Let's zoom it out just a bit more. Yeah, there we are. Let's see where's best to put this. Just a little lower. All right. No, I'll put up my home rules if you guys are actually, let's just get a link. With the link, can view. Perfect. Oh, yeah, y'all. So I'll just put this up in chat for you guys if you want to check this out yourself. But these are kind of some of the home rules we've created. Some of them I've stolen from other sources. Some of them are popular variants. The two I'm most proud of that I've sort of come up with myself are drunkenness and my dynamic flanking rule set, alongside intentional falling can be fun. But with drunkenness, basically the way it works, whenever someone takes a drink, there's a few different basically drink types that have their own strengths. But the first thing you do is you make a constitution saving throw. On a save, you basically take quote unquote half drunkenness damage. So if you're just drinking a beer and you pass your saving throw, you'll roll a 1d4 minus 1. And say you roll a 3, minus 1 is 2. If you passed your save, that means 1. So you'll take 1 drunkenness point from drinking that beer. Then you kind of look at the chart to see, like, if your drunkenness equals your constitution mod, you're buzzed, then all this happens. If it's your con mod plus proficiency, instead you have this, you could go from buzzed to drunk to sloshed to blackout. And over time, you'll be losing your drunkenness. So Perch is a very constitution-based character, so he has a really good con save and con mod, which means he almost always passes his drunkenness save, so he's consistently taking half drunkenness. In addition, his con mod is so high that it's already really hard for him to get drunk. So it is possible for Perch to get drunk. He just tends to need to get pretty deep or to find some really heavy stuff to drink before he can really get there. So wait, does that mean that the other two party members look out of place, like hired mercenaries or guards for them? Yeah, definitely. Tortuga looks very much like a poor monk from Zisha, which is a little weird with this group. And Malachite is a very small green girl, so she holds a bit of interest to her. Though she also tends to present herself in a very servile manner. So they kind of come across as Perch being a bit of a rich person who has his own Benor dwarf that makes armor for him, and they both are kind of in service of an Aarakocra. In fact, just recently, the party, while in a city, made up a story about Pharaoh being a princess and them being her specialized guardians that got them into a very interesting state. Okay, to add to that, an Aarakocra's in the party is probably a more pleasant sight than saying a gnoll, for example. Yeah, so luckily none of the party members at this time are of a monstrous race, which can complicate things to a degree. So yeah, Aarakocra is more so seen as like a pleasant, high intrigue sort of character, whereas a gnoll, a half-orc, a full-blooded orc, or a goblin, something along those lines, would be a lot more hesitancy to come up. I just burned my finger. Darn us, no! I'm sorry. So yeah, that's a bit more how Aarakocra is seen in the world. That's a bit of lore about where they're from. I hope you all enjoy taking a look at some of the home rules I like to run with. The princess thing definitely didn't go to her head, I'm sure. We'll definitely get there eventually. Just make sure to remind me whenever we get to the city of Rogla. But, I'm afraid we are bumping aggressively into time for today. So I'm afraid it's at the point when I need to wish you all a good night. I scribbled something cursed regarding yesterday's stream. All right. I'll be sure to take a look at that. But I'm afraid I have to say good night to you all. And that I hope to see you all tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow, sorry. Next weekend. As we begin again. Oh. Let's see here. I'll take a look at Twitter. 1 second, Marina. Cowabunga it is. Cowabunga it is indeed. So, good night. I hope to see you all next weekend as we begin again with more Mass Effect and get into the next part of story time. Well, my hopes were high for tomorrow. Yeah, I'm sorry. I misspoke, Marcia. But I'm afraid we will not be going tomorrow. As tomorrow, I have my own Dungeons & Dragons session to do. So, nighty-eye. See you next weekend. And bring your best. 'Cause the horror is just beginning.